My name is Patrick Newbery. I'm Chief Strategy Officer of Method. Method is an experience design company founded in San Francisco, and we're also now in New York and London. And I'm Chief Digital Officer of Global Logic. And what that means is that I help Global Logic and their clients understand what's the experience and business side of technology and advantages. As such, I kind of sit at the intersection of design and engineering. That's really my focus. Which is good because for everyone in the real world, that's where the real world exists, right? Nobody lives purely in design. Nobody lives purely in engineering. So can I ask a favor? Can everyone smile? I'd like to take a picture. 1, 2, 3. Great. So this is a really neat camera. I don't know, has anyone used the Samsung Galaxy camera? It's kind of interesting. It's a really cool interface. One of the things it allows you to do is treat it like a DSLR. So you can actually set the aperture, the shutter speed, because you can go in and you can call up this interface, which is really kind of neat. Except when you're taking a picture, you can't really do that because it's the viewfinder. So you're holding it up and you're looking, and if you want to set those things, you kind of take it down and set them, and then you put it back up. So it's a little bit of a disconcerting experience. Now, this is the view through my standard DSLR, right? Doesn't look anywhere as nice, doesn't look as fun. However, you notice that there's information down here, and I can change all the parameters of the camera as I'm shooting, and I get real-time feedback. So really, which is better? Well, they both take great pictures. This has auto and manual settings. This does email. This does Android apps. I can put a SIM in it and make phone calls from it. This one takes great pictures. It has interchangeable lenses. I can put auto and manual focus. I've got interchangeable battery. So really, which device is more user-friendly? Which is a better design, right? And the challenge is that really depends. It depends on who's using it and why. So it's not about the design itself. It's really about the context of the user. And that's one of the key things that design has to understand. Because when you're designing, it's not subjective or objective decisions about quality. It's really thinking about what's making the most sense. So again, if I'm traveling, this is great because it's lightweight. It has a lot of functionality built into it. I can put it in a backpack. This is great because I have a lot more control, and it allows me greater control of my photography. It allows me to use my other gear as well. So really, user-friendly is not just about UI usability. And this is one of the things that I think design really needs to kind of grasp hold of and educate the other stakeholders of business and processes. That design isn't just about making things look better. That design has a bigger role. And that's really what I want to talk about today. Now, one of the things that I believe is an interesting way to think about this is when we're looking at any kind of UI, any digital experience, really the quality comes down to two things, right? It comes down to what is the cognitive load? How much do I have to think when I'm using this against how much value I get, right? And the reason this is interesting is because there's two ways to solve this, right? You can solve it by making things easier to use. You can also solve it by making things do more that users want. And the question is, which is a better approach to take? Now, if we do this, we can spend a lot of design time, we can do a lot of things, but at the end of the day, if people don't get enough value out of what we've done, if it only works for, wow, this was great the first 5, 10, 20 times, but after that, it doesn't do enough for me, I'll put it down. However, if it does a lot for me, I'll learn how to use it, right? In the, I guess, the early part of this century, mobile phones had very small screens and keyboards and lots of features that were hard to discover. American high school students prided themselves in being able to figure out everything the phone did. They were bored, they wanted to go through and figure it out. But they learned. It wasn't that it was a great UI, but they discovered that the more they learned about it, the more valuable it would be. And in some sense, it was a status symbol to know all the things your phone did. So again, when you think about design, it's not just about making it easier to use. We have to think about what is it providing as value. So we also have to think about where does the design experience begin? Where does the user experience begin? And really, the user experience begins when they first learn about the product, because that's when the expectations are set. That's when they begin to think, what is this thing supposed to do for me? Second, when they take it out of the box, or when they first start using it, right? That's where you begin to set up, this is what it's going to do for you. This is how you use it. There's something called the, and pardon my English, the oh shit moment. When you buy something at the store and you get it home and you're excited and you open the box and you go, oh shit, I didn't get the right adapter, or this is not the right platform, and this is the wrong model, right? So all of a sudden the user experience starts before we may have even touched the product itself. Then there's the first use. So the first time I use it, how quickly do I get what I want out of it? How fast do I get the value that I think that I need? And then ongoing use. So ongoing use, there's a couple things. What happens when I have problems? How easy is it for me to figure out how to correct that or get support? But more importantly, as I get better at using it, how much more value does it allow me to have? So again, this is great expectation setting. You look at it on the website, that looks neat, right? You get it, you fire it up, you look at the UI, that's great. It does all these wonderful things, right? But at the end of the day, the more I use it, the more I experience its limitations. This is a bit more complex. When I'm thinking about what does it do? Is this the right camera for me? When I get it out of the box, how do I set it up? How do I make sure I get going? But the more I use it, the more value I get. So really, the user experience doesn't start at the screen. That's one of the key things that I want everyone to take away. So when we're thinking about user-friendly, when we're thinking about design, let's not just think about what's on the screen. Let's not just judge by the pixels and the wireframes. I tell a lot of our designers that when you start there, it's like you're putting yourself inside the application and painting the application for the world to see. But that's not where the user is. The user's in the real world looking at this and saying, how do I make sense of this? Where does it fit into my world? So I want to talk a little bit about why that's important and how to get there. Now, the first thing to think about is that when you're designing for people, right, we're designing experiences. So let's talk a little bit about what an experience is and why experience is important. Well, as humans, we're always taking information in. We're always taking data in. We see, we taste, we hear, we smell, we feel, we measure time, we measure space. We know when our bodies are in motion. We know when we're at rest. We cannot not experience. So every day, all day, even when we're sleeping, we're taking something in. So it's a key thing. We may not be aware of everything that's coming into our brain, but a lot is coming in. And we're not always conscious of how we use it. So a lot of the things that we do are based on information, but we're acting kind of from our subconscious. At the same time, we are aware of our emotions, which is very important because our emotions are what allow us to lay down experiences. That's what helps us translate things that happen to us into things that we remember. That's a really key point because as a designer, we're trying to think about what are the kinds of emotions we want to create because that's going to lay down the experiences. That's going to lay down what people think about our product. We'll talk about that a little bit later because that's very important. So memory is very intrinsic to the way we think. We make our decisions based upon our memory. So really, every day we wake up, who we are is a manifestation of everything that's happened before us. We define ourselves by our histories. So we perceive how we make sense of things all happens based on this kind of roadmap, this foundation of the experiences that we've had that become memories. So who we are is shaped by what's happened to us. So experience equals what happens over time. So I know that this may be like, well, what does it have to do with design? But this is just a reality of humans. This is a reality of the people that you're designing for. So it's important to understand this and keep it in mind. Let's talk about design now. So design is, to me, it's both a verb and a noun. Design is the process of thinking through what are we trying to solve for? What is the problem that we're solving for? And it's the noun in terms of it's the thing that we produce. It's the manifestation of that process. It's the output. So to me, I like the idea of design and imagination. So to imagine is to form a mental picture or image of something. And design is a method of imagining what something could be with enough detail to bring it to life, right? To make it real. So balancing all the requirements, the opportunities, all the constraints, determining the utility, this is all what makes something the final product. This is all what makes it more desirable. So that design process of imagining what could be and then giving it that right detail to make it real is really what I think design is about. So design's a reflection of the culture that produces it. So we have to think about who we're designing for. We have to think about our influences, because design can be timeless. It could be the goal that we want something that is universal, but design can also be very much rooted in time. We want something that makes sense to the people who are looking at it, and that they look at it and say, wow, I understand that very easily. Design can also be used to signify change. We might choose choose a particular design style because it's innovative, because it's showing that it's different. And design, of course, helps form equal function. So design is that thing that allows us to understand, what does this do? How do we like it? And of course, the form equals function here, I think, is carried out well. You see the lens, but you also see the touch screen. You realize that this is more than just a camera. This looks like a camera, right? And you'd expect it to have all the functions of a camera. So again, form equals function is a good output for design. But I think function, we have to think about, what does function mean? What are people looking for? What is the value they expect from what you design? And it can be very utilitarian, but it can also be emotional. It can be about ideals. So we have to think about, when we're designing and we're balancing form and function, what does the function mean? It's important because function helps establish meaning, and meaning establishes value, right? We determine what we like, what something is worth based upon how we understand its meaning. So really, design is this method of translating ideas into value. So I want to put that together and now talk about experience design. Now, many people talk about user experience design, and I think of user experience design as that subset of all design that's really focused on what the user's doing at moments in time. But when I think about experience design, I think about it as something that's a bit broader. And I think it's really important for designers to understand this, because as you begin to work with larger teams, as you're working for businesses, you want them to understand, how do I think about what design is achieving for me? Right? We just went through what design is. It's more than just what it looks like. It's more than just the colors, the fonts, the arrangements on screens. There's something broader here, and we need to educate people into what that means. And experience design, for me, is the way that we do that. So experience, again, we said, is what happens over time. So for products and services, the experience that we get is the value that we receive, that perceived value, that the reason that we spend time or money, compared to the expectations we had going in over time. So the products and services, compared to my needs and the context of use over time. Now, that changes, right? Over time means that it's not a one-time thing. As a designer, it's very easy to look at our screens, look at our design and say, that's perfect. It makes sense to me. This is wonderful. We all love it, right? Put yourself in the shoes of the user, right, who hasn't been working on it for a week, a month, never seen it before. What is this? I can't make sense of it. Or let's say they make sense of it. Let's say it's very easy to use. They're on their 50th or 100th time using it. They're like, gosh, I wish this would do more, right? So we have to think about, again, what are the needs and context over time, and how will that shift? Why is this important? Well, when we think about experience, what happens over time, we think about value. And think about an experience you've had. Let's say that you sign up for a service online. Great, but then I have to go to validate my email address in order to log in. I'm in. Great, things aren't quite working out. Things are better, things are okay. Over time, your overall experience, the memory of that product or service that builds up, is either going positive, negative, or neutral, right? And as a designer, you want to think about that. When you're making decisions, you're thinking about, how am I supporting this? Because over time, The more positive the value, the more engaged the customer is, the more engaged the user is. The worse experience they have, the more that they're moving away, the more they're becoming apathetic, right? Now, if you think about it, if you're a business, right, you want customers engaged. An engaged customer is much more valuable than any other form of customer. Right now, companies around the world spend 100 times more on acquiring customers than they do on retaining them, right? They spend more on getting people through the door than they do on engaging them. But figures also show that they make more money from that engaged customer. And in fact, the customers that move into the apathetic or the negative space never come back. So design is actually the area that helps businesses drive better engagement. But they don't realize it because they're thinking design makes things look better. Right? So if you're a service-based revenue, engagement is key. People that sell products, they want you to buy the product. Once you bought the product, they're thinking about the next product. If you're a service-based company, I need your money every month. I need you to stay engaged in my service because if you depart, you're not coming back, and all of a sudden I've lost that revenue. So that's a very different approach to looking at what the value of a user is. Design for the previous century was all focused about selling the thing, helping businesses sell things. But business is shifting. Business is now much more service-based, so design has to focus on that engagement. And again, experience design, helping people understand that it's not just about what it looks like, but it's about what it does. And what it does over time is a key differentiator. What we see from an experience design perspective is that the spectrum of design, the way that design helps business is that business has to have a brand promise, right? Business has to be relevant to the customer. Otherwise, people say, why you? Why not your competitor? There has to be some point of differentiation. Well, that differentiation has to be made real in the products and services, right? They have to be valuable, but they also have to be different from the competitor. And then lastly, the customer experience, that over time, the relationship has to be delivering on that value and differentiation. Otherwise, people are walking. This is a different view of what design should be doing. If you're a business and you don't understand this, basically someone's going to eat your lunch, okay? This approach is largely what Apple has done to disrupt the smartphone market, the PC market. They basically go out and they create experiences that span that entire spectrum. And they've disrupted industry after industry, right? And everybody looks at Apple and says, how do they do it? They've got such great design. Their products look so wonderful. It's beyond the product, right? They've aligned everything. They've aligned the brand, the product, and the experience. Everything Apple does basically is part of a larger ecosystem of experiences. It's extremely effective. They're the most valuable company in the world, right? Why business doesn't understand this yet? Not sure. But if designers understand this, you're going to be a much better partner for business than if you don't. So why is it important for you to understand this? Well, in addition to this being more than just about what a single screen looks like, in addition to this being more than just the aesthetics of what design is doing, there's another aspect to think about. The world that we live in is changing. So business is having to change the way that they think about how they approach the market, how they approach the customer, because things are going digital. What this means is that software is driving the value chain. So across every industry, across every type of business, software is continuing to become a key part of driving the value chain. So from chip to cloud to customer experience, almost everything we do these days, there's a component of software driving that experience. So the value, the role that experience design is going to play, especially in the digital space, will become more important to every business. But there's also another change going on. The future of UI and UX will begin to shift because design will need to think beyond the pixel, right? The reason is that the cost of processing, right, the cost of a CPU, the size, is going down dramatically. So all of a sudden, things can become computer-enabled. We've seen this for a long time, but the cost is literally going through the floor. At the same time, the cost of memory is declining. The cost of storage is declining. What all of this means is that this quarter billion terabytes of data that we create every day is going to continue to grow, right? That is a lot of data, right? Data is now becoming the new commodity. It's the new raw material. It's the new oil. Data is becoming a material that design will begin to work with. So when I think about data, I think about there's 3 stages of data that we're looking at, right? First stage is what I call the plumbing. So this is where big data has been in the past. This is about architectures, Hadoop, reduced map. This is all about how we get the data, where we put it, and what we do with it. So it's about extract, transform, and load. It's all the stuff that design doesn't really care about too much. The second stage is analysis. So this is about data visualization. This is about insights. This is about how you present data. And right now, there's a lot of focus there that this is the new area to kind of look at for data. There's an issue here. The analysis and insights provided by data are only good as the questions that you ask. And right now, what we're seeing is that although there's a lot of interest in data visualization and presenting data to people, it's somewhat meaningless, because if you're not looking for the right thing, you're just going to get back the obvious patterns. But a very interesting aspect is what I call the emergent value of data. Anyone here ever read any complexity theory? So one of the interesting things about complexity theory is this topic, this idea of emergence. And emergence really is a concept based on when we look at evolution, when we look at what we consider linear evolution, it's not quite as linear as one would think. And the idea is that things happen not because they are purposely going in a particular direction. Things happen because as circumstances change, new possibilities arise. And so to give an example of this, I often talk about digital photography. So photography was invented back in the mid-1800s. And over time, the quality and availability of photography compared to the cost has been going up. So it's becoming lower cost, and the quality and the availability has been getting better, right? More cameras, better lenses, better chemistry. And at a certain point, we crossed into digital, where all of a sudden now you've got cheaper photography, you've got the ability for people to take photos virtually anywhere. And as a result, you see a nonlinear growth in terms of the number of pictures taken. So right around here, it went from a kind of a slow growth to just taking off. A couple of reasons for that, right? We had cameras in our mobile phones. The cost of a digital camera went down. We had disposable digital cameras. It just became very cheap to get a digital camera. Second, we had things like Facebook. We had things like Flickr. So photos became what I call social currency. You took pictures where you never took pictures before. I can remember seeing pictures of cocktail parties that were really non-events. And I'm like, no one would have ever taken a picture of these before, but now everyone takes them and they share them. Well, what happens? We have a company like Instagram, 12 guys valued at $1 billion acquired by Facebook, right? This is allowed to happen because of these factors, right? You couldn't have predicted Instagram looking at the increase, the quality of photography over time. It was a nonlinear growth in the number of photos that allowed something like Instagram to be a viable company. Again, Instagram emerged from a set of circumstances that were changing. Instagram was not the evolution of the photo business. As we think about this, as we think about the Internet of Everything, as we think about a lot more data coming available to people, we begin to realize that there'll be new value areas that data can drive. So today, with IoT, we know that we've got the ability for control based on presence, senses, and monitors. We're beginning to move into efficiency, even limited agency. You know, I put self-driving cars here, but we will soon be into self-management. And the thing about this is that you will see both the quality and differentiation of services will increase. You'll be able to do interesting things that you could never do before. You'll be able to do things that are very distinct for one brand over another because of the data they have. In addition, you will see different kinds of businesses begin to come up because of the sophistication of the data economies. Who's providing the data, who's buying it, what they're doing with it. This is going to create a new space for design to work in. This is going to create a new set of opportunities. But as you move into that space, it may not be the same kind of design thinking you've been doing today. It will still be experience design, but it will be in a different lens. So the reason I think this is important is everyone who's involved in a company like GlobalLogic or anybody who's working with technology is going to be at the forefront of this. And we need to change the way that we take our design thinking into this space. We need to begin to adopt some new ways of looking at the world. So it's still very early in terms of who's using this and how they're using it. But as we move forward, there are 3 things as designers you should expect to think about. First is think beyond today's applications and devices. Again, right now, when I think about UX and UI design, I think about what's it going to look like on this screen. But when I start thinking about the Internet of Everything, when I start thinking about the different kinds of data, I begin to realize that that may be a very limiting approach. So now I want to begin thinking about wearables. I want to think about things that are both basic wearables and smart wearables. So a basic wearable is something that doesn't have an OS, may not even have a screen on it, whereas a smart wearable has an OS. I want to think about sensors, actuators, processors. I want to think about materials, smart materials, things that are pressure sensitive, things that change based upon the environment, the behavior. And I want to think about contextually aware environments. So all of a sudden, when I think about creating an experience, when I think about what the user experience could be, I'm not limiting it to a screen. I'm thinking about a lot of different components. So I want to show you a brief video that is a project that we did out of our Method London office to kind of show you how this kind of change in thinking could apply.
As an anaesthetist, what I would do during a long surgical case is obviously keep the patient asleep, but also you're trying to keep the patient stable. And that means I need to have continuous awareness of their blood pressure, the oxygen level within their bloodstream, and a number of other parameters which are vital for the sustenance of life, if you like.
So we developed a head-mounted display which puts that data in the clinician's field of view so they can direct more attention towards the patient and less attention trying to see conventional monitor screens.
When things start to go a little bit wrong, say the patient bleeds rather a lot during the surgery and the blood pressure drops, then my job is to notice that immediately, not after a long delay, and treat it quickly.
The thing that we were briefed on was to build an app for a platform like Google Glass. There's a long list of reasons why these don't necessarily solve the problem. Our approach is to begin with the user, not an engineering specification. So when you follow that path, you can end up in a very different place. Vivi is not a pair of glasses. It's a very different kind of product that solves a real problem for real people.
I mean, there's so many challenges, like the optics needed to be designed, what information is important at what time, then how do you configure the product when you've scrubbed up, even getting data from a conventional patient monitor was a big challenge.
So really what we wanted to do was start from the ground up. We took pieces of Lego and started building with them, creating very, very simple prototypes, and really it was that sort of learning and thinking through building that was really important to what we were doing.
We designed the app, we designed the GUI on the device, we did the industrial design, we did the engineering, we did the gateway device that interfaces with the patient monitor.
We wanted to make sure that the physical device felt comfortable with the application that we were building, and by working on all of the parts concurrently, actually we were able to do that really successfully.
Together, Method and GlobalLogic offer an end-to-end experience design and development service. Vivi leveraged all of this capability to deliver a solution that truly integrates everything in a single approach. The fact is, we didn't just talk about it, we built it.
Going through the process of naming, we came across Vivi, which is Latin for life, and it felt like it was a really great fit for both the product and what it was doing.
We thought we were onto something useful. It just needed that extra step to be taken.
What we achieved with the project is a high fidelity prototype. Really what it needs now is clinical testing and more rigorous in-theatre action.
You can't get a better opportunity than creating a product that's going to help save people's lives. And that's all about a real-world, practical problem that matters to human beings when they need it most.
So a couple of things about that. You notice that when they came to us, they asked for an application for a platform. Okay, so the client came in thinking they knew what they wanted, right? You notice that the people that were talking about the design said, we wanted to do something different. Those were UX designers, okay? Those were UX designers that said, you know what, let's step back and think about what you're really doing here. What's the real context of use? What's the need? And what's the appropriate solution? And again, you notice that this is a wearable, that while this looks nice and the branding looks nice, that the interface is very basic, because the problem is not what does it look like, the problem is it useful? Are we getting the data from the different devices to this? What's the overall context of use, right? So I think this is an example of, as a designer and you begin to look at this data-driven world, you begin to take a slightly different view of what you should be doing. Now, some people who have worked with product managers may say, but isn't that the product manager's role, right? Shouldn't they be doing it? Yes, they should, but they may not be doing it well. And making sure that design understands their role and how to support that, I think, allows you to create more value and actually move design forward in terms of its importance. So the next thing I want to talk about is expand your boundaries beyond defining UI. So that was as a product, it still had a visual UI, right? It still had numbers that you look at. But again, in the near future, a lot of the experiences may not have a screen component. Our interfaces may be very distributed. So as you begin to think in this area, we have to think about what role does sound play, right? Sound is a cue. We talked to a company that sells speakers, stereo speakers and stereo systems. And we said, you know, sound is a natural interface element. Nobody owns sound as an interface, right? No company has come out and said, here's the way to use sound in UI. We even talked to them about, hey, sound can be a way of transmitting data. I think Google has a patent for using sound to actually activate devices. But there's a whole space where we can begin to think about sound as something different. Movement, behavior, voice, activity and behavior. These are all the different kinds of things that now are part of your palette beyond color, visual hierarchy, fonts. These are things that the designer has got to come to the table and help the client make sense of. And whereas Method started in 1999 because there weren't that many people that understood designing for the screen, right now we've got a world where there's not a lot of people who understand how to design beyond the screen. That's a huge opportunity for every business that employs designers, because if their designers understand that, they've got a competitive advantage. So there aren't a lot of compelling examples of beyond the screen, but there is a project that we did internally that I think illustrates what some of the approaches and challenges could be. So this is a device called Henry, and really it's a prototyping device, and I'll show you how they used it.
What will happen when user interfaces move beyond the screen if our only canvas is light and sound? Do we have the tools to understand those interactions? You can't design interactive languages like that in Photoshop. Increasingly, we are creating experiences for objects that have no screens, but are still richly woven into our lives. Our traditional design tools have never really allowed us to understand this opportunity, nor to prototype or explore. So we created Henry, a prototyping tool that allows designers to create light and sound patterns in real time without the need to code. It's paired with an app that lets people record and replay these patterns. It started life as a workshop prop for the 2015 Interaction Design Conference to get designers thinking about how to design for screenless objects. We asked participants to use Henry to communicate different situations. For example, how would a Band-Aid notify you when your cut is healed? Or how would your front door alert you to grab an umbrella on your way out? We learned that a real-time tool with no coding helps designers focus on what they are creating, rather than how they're creating it. Henry has 5 controls, yet we only have 2 hands, which encourages people to experiment as a team, similar to how musicians get together and jam. The approachability of the tool encourages trial and error, while the recording and playback cycle encourages people to critique and iterate on what they've created. As a tool used for a workshop, Henry shows us how our industry is changing and also illustrates that designing our own tools helps us keep up with these changes.
I was talking to the designers who came up with this concept and ideas, and they realized how limiting that is. That's just a device for prototyping. It's a sandbox for playing. And their vision is that you would have an online resource where people can share patterns. They can share UI patterns that have been developed based on light and sound. So that, for instance, we could say, what is a low-level alert? What's a high-level alert? What are things that do different kinds of functions? But I think it begins to show that you have to think beyond what we do on screen. What are the other cues that as interaction designers, as experience designers, and UI designers will now use? Because if my UI is not screen-based, then what are my affordances? What are my alerts based on? It's a very different process in designing a voice UI than there is in a screen-based UI. And any people who've ever done it know how difficult it is. So again, beginning to become familiar with this way of thinking, with the tools, beginning to develop your own tool sets and frameworks here is incredibly important for designers today. So the last thing I'm going to say about designing with data and changing the way that you think about design is look to create value that was previously impossible to create. Okay? And this ties back to emergence. And I think every designer wants to explore, wants to innovate, and this is a rich area to do it in. Now, again, this is a little bit of a challenging topic for people to wrap their heads around, so I want to use a thought experiment. This was a thought, it was actually a problem designed for measuring cognitive creativity. But in terms of emergent value, we're talking about what happens when I connect things? What happens when I aggregate, when I correlate, when I use different data sources to enhance an experience? So the model that I'd like to use is this one. And the challenge is that we've got these components. We have a 10-inch candle, 3 strike anywhere matches, a 1-inch square of stainless steel, and these 2 stainless steel rings that are about 32 ounces in weight. And your challenge is that you have to, picking up only one ring, pick the other ring up off the floor and be able to suspend it, right? And most people look at this and say, okay, well, I think if I maybe melt the candle and use the wax, and what they find is that actually the weight will break the wax. The wax won't allow you to pick up both rings. So it's a very difficult problem to solve for, right? But if you take a different approach, if you take this, okay, well, if we're thinking about aggregating, if we're thinking about what's available to us, we might break these things down into their components. So we think about use and composition. So we think about what a candle is used for, what it's made of, and we can look across things and we begin to realize that, you know what, a candle has string and rings can be used for tying things. If we could get the string, maybe using a straight edge to scrape the wax off, we would have a solution. And that, in fact, is the solution. You break the candle, you scrape the wax off, you use the string to tie the 2 rings together, you pick one up and the other one comes with it, right? But the only way you get to that is by breaking the things down into their elements. So thinking about what is the data available in the system that I'm creating? What is the data needed? Where would that data come from? Beginning to break things down and think in different ways allows you to create some interesting combinations. So here's an example. It's very futuristic. This doesn't exist, but applying this thinking, you might get this kind of thing.
Inspired by research on the effects of hormones on the decision-making of financial workers, we designed the Bank of Physiology, a hypothetical institute at the convergence of finance and healthcare, which delivers hormone-powered financial advice. Using hormone analysis technology to enable you to understand your spending patterns and improve your financial well-being.
It feels a little futuristic, a little silly maybe, but actually it's not impossible to do today, right? It's the kind of thing that somebody's going to look at and say, wow, we haven't thought of that. Well, you know, let's try it and see what happens. And those kinds of things are where innovation is going to come from. So if you think about this notion of emergence, that's really what drives a lot of disruptive innovation. And I think for designers to understand that it's not just about searching in the dark or waiting for some kind of creative inspiration to strike them, that there's actual ways of beginning to think about how can we identify these kinds of opportunities. And part of it, I think, is moving beyond our traditional ways of thinking about design, beginning to understand that design is not just about what things look like, it's about how they behave, but more importantly, what value they deliver to the users, and beginning to think about what are the different things that I can begin to work with to create value, and what's important to understand in terms of how we apply traditional design practices, because it may not be screen-based, it may be very broad. So it's no longer just about making things aesthetically pleasing. The point of design is that we're moving from thinking about focusing on appearances to focusing on behaviors to focusing on meaning. And if you remember when I started, I said form equals function is important because function is tied to value. Well, value and meaning go together. So today, a lot of people think of design, their awareness is really that it's about signifying quality. It's a step in finishing a product or a service. I think companies are beginning to realize, and designers are beginning to realize, that it's an advantage and it's a differentiator. So as we move from the choices of it just has to look better to why it looks better, but increasingly companies that are leading are ones that are figuring out that we have to think of a design system that manages everything that the company is doing. Things have to be coherent, things have to work well together, right? And I think the future, and where we're starting to see lots of leaders, is where meaning, design is really an advanced, it's a core process that shapes the business, that shapes how people think about value creation and defining the brand. And this is where we're going to see lots of companies coming out of nowhere and doing extremely well because they're going to be able to use data, they're going to be able to use advanced technologies to create new products and services. And the ones where design is thinking this way will do much better than the ones where design is thinking this way. So again, I think what's the point of design? The point of design is that you need to be driving down towards that direction. You need to not stop with just making things look beautiful, but making things be valuable, making things be engaging. So really, in summary, great user experiences require an experience design mindset. We need to get beyond just thinking about our discipline and the things that we currently judge ourselves on. It means it's not just about the user and the interface. As businesses become more digital, designers need to think in new ways. And this is really, I think, a great opportunity for everyone in this room to think about how do we build the future? What is that going to look like? What is design practice as it evolves and emerges? So let's show the world what design can really make. Thank you very much.